Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. Let's talk about Season 2, Episode 1 of Star Trek Lower Decks. Season 2 has now premiered on the newly branded Paramount Plus, or newly rebranded Paramount Plus, formerly CBS All Access. And the first episode was called Strange Energies. So if you saw any of my reviews of the episodes from last season, you know that I don't love this show. It bothers me in a lot of ways. I don't know if I should say a lot of ways. They do a lot of things that bother me, but it's all sort of in the same vein. That is to say, the reason I don't like this show as much as I don't like it is primarily because they make the characters look like absolute asses, which is fine as a comedy cartoon, but not when those people are supposed to be members of a hierarchical, an organization that has a hierarchy in which the people are supposed to conduct themselves as professionals and as people who follow a chain of command and a code of conduct. Lower Decks throws all of that out the window, and it treats these characters like they're members of a frat, you know, a college fraternity or a sorority, and college kids. And they are young, and that's part of the point, that, you know, these are the not so polished officers. So that's okay to an extent, but they take it way too far, and they treat the senior officers the same way. So it just doesn't sit right with me, generally speaking, most of the time, this show, because of how it portrays everybody massively uncharacteristically as compared to how they should behave. And I know it sounds like I'm saying, well, you can't do Star Trek as comedy. I'm not really saying that, though I think the argument could be made that you can't really do Star Trek as comedy. It's not supposed to be comedy. There's comedy in it. There's always been comedy in it, but it's not supposed to be slapstick, Rick and Morty, bizarro, wacky comedy. And, you know, I'm not someone who hasn't ever enjoyed poking fun at Star Trek vis-a-vis Saturday Night Live, which pokes fun at Star Trek, or has a history of doing that, I should say, sometimes with the help of actors from Star Trek, notably William Shatner and Patrick Stewart at different times. Mad TV poked fun at Star Trek back in the day. Night Court did, you know, so it's fine, but those things were not supposed to be part of the actual Star Trek continuity, whereas this show is. So I just can't abide it for that reason. I don't know, maybe it's just something I should just get over and make a mental block in my head and separate it from that and pretend that it's separate, even though the producers have not said that, and just enjoy it. And to a certain extent, I do, but in the back of my mind, I'm always groaning and going, this is supposed to be canon. How can this be canon? It's outrageous. But anyway, Season 2, Strange Energies, first episode. I checked it out. We open with Mariner in a situation where she's under interrogation by a Cardassian. Apparently, this is a holodeck simulation, we soon find out. But before we find that out, she's escaping from the Cardassians, running through the base or the ship, trying to get away. She comes across Boimler, who is trussed up to the ceiling, you know, via chains on his hands and feet and stuff. Well, chains, they're electronic, but you know, he's trussed up like this against the wall, hanging from the ceiling. And he calls out to her, and he's like, hey, what are you doing? You got to help me out. You got to get me out of here. They keep showing me lights, which was hilarious. That's a hilarious joke. It's hilarious as a reference to what happened in Star Trek before with Picard. It's funny. It's good humor. It's poking fun at Star Trek. It's great. Again, it's not something I don't get. It's not something that I can't appreciate it. I wrote stupid, funny comedy Star Trek fan fiction myself. I did it when I was in 7th grade. So, you know, if that tells you anything. So I get it, but like I said, I have problems with the show. Anyway, I liked that moment. I thought it was funny. The next thing we see is that she's Mariner, that is, trying to escape the Cardassians after she gets away from the prison or whatever it is by escaping in a Starfleet ship called the USS Macduff, which it would seem is named after Kiernan Macduff, who was a Sataran in The Next Generation, season 5 episode called Conundrum. And while she's doing this, she makes a joke about how Starfleet officers are not supposed to have interpersonal conflicts. She's like, I know we're not supposed to have interpersonal conflicts, but I have to say blah, blah, blah. And that was funny, of course, because it's a reference to the fact that one of Gene's rules about Star Trek was that the officers got along and they didn't argue with each other. They didn't have interpersonal conflict, which of course changed after he died on DS9, notably, if not other post-Roddenberry Star Trek outings. But I thought that was funny that they threw that in there. It's, something that the fans will pick up on. The next thing we find out is that Mariner has this holodeck thing comes to an end and she goes back to her duties. And she ends up on a sort of side mission, this time with her mother's approval, the captain's approval, to try to clean up the city on this planet that the crew is making a second contact on. And she winds up unearthing this sort of thing on top of a structure that catches the sunlight and shoots like a ray beam onto the first officer, Ransom, and gives him sort of Gary Mitchell-like powers. Of course, prompting Gary Mitchell references from the crew, which again is cool, but okay. He, of course, attacks the ship because he feels undervalued. It turns out that in this God state, his sort of inner monologue of feeling undervalued among the crew or by the captain comes out, and he's sort of going rogue. It turns out that the way they defeat him and get him to stop wrecking stuff is Mariner kicks him in the junk. So there was that. All while this is happening, there was a subplot in the episode where Tendi is trying to fix the cyborg crew member guy, whose name I can't remember, when it seems to her that his brain is malfunctioning, which it kind of did towards the end of last season because of the implant. But he isn't actually broken, so it's just something she's kind of doing because he seems interested in someone that she doesn't think he should be interested in for whatever reason, possibly because she's interested in him. I don't know, but it was just kind of a little funny side plot, but didn't really go anywhere, so I don't know how good it was, but it was there. Anyway, we finally see actual Boimler in this episode, as opposed to just a holographic representation of him. He's on the Titan as it's about to investigate some kind of anomaly, and he's freaking out because it's dangerous, and Riker is sort of handling it in kind of a flippant way, in a way that's kind of caricaturistic of Riker. It's taking it's taking the Riker character and sort of turning him into a caricature and having him behave as a caricature of Riker would behave, and which is kind of crazy, and it's freaking Boimler out. So it was kind of funny to watch him go through that. But I like Boimler. I had, would have preferred to have him more present during the episode, but anyway, we do get to see him in the end. And we don't really know how that's going to turn out. Presumably we'll find out more about that in future episodes, although maybe not, because this series is episodic as opposed to serialized, which is one of the things about it that makes it better Star Trek than the other Kurtzman Trek we've been getting. I do like it for that. It has other elements, it's overall, it's presented in a very Star Trek way in terms of format, in terms of aesthetic. So it's more reminiscent of previous Trek than Picard or Discovery are in terms of aesthetic. So that's another reason why I find the show likable. This episode did not have any super blatant behavior on behalf of the characters that was uncharacteristic of people in an organization with a hierarchy. I resist calling it a military. So that was good. It didn't sort of blow the whole premise of a hierarchical organization the way most of the previous episodes did. It seemed to keep to a less blatantly uncharacteristic set of behaviors, to put it very oddly, on behalf of the characters who acted more like officers in a hierarchical organization than they did previously. So it didn't rub me the wrong way, and they didn't do anything in this episode that flew in the face of continuity. I don't remember them doing that a lot in the first season either, whereas of course Discovery continually does. So second season so far, I like it better than the first season for what it is, which is a zany, wacky, irreverent take on Star Trek, which, to be fair, is a tricky thing to pull off without shitting on Star Trek. The same would be true of a parody of, Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Star Wars or, Knight Rider or the A-Team, whatever. So you got to give them credit for striking a balance that makes you laugh with them as opposed to laughing at them. And they do that. I just had a lot of problems with all the super uncharacteristic stuff that they made these Starfleet officers do in season 1 and that they were able to get away with, which flies in the face of what would actually happen in a hierarchical organization. I get bonus points every time I use that word that I possibly made up myself, in case you're wondering. Anyway, of course, Lower Decks is also weekly because, like Discovery and like Picard, and because they're trying to drag out the subscriptions. So I'll have to report on future episodes as they come out. Hopefully there won't be a big break between chunks of the season, which I think they did last season. But anyway, it was sort of growing on me at the end of last season. I'm liking it better so far this season. They didn't have somebody sitting in a chair naked and like a nudity joke, like they did last season, which was just stupid for Star Trek. So I'm liking it a little better. We'll see where it goes. Interestingly, I did have a Twitter interaction with the woman who voices Mariner, where she was talking about how people are complaining about the show. And I kind of said, well, you could make the show better. And she was like, nah. She said on Twitter, "Oh Lord, the people mad about swearing in Trek might want to just spare their ill hearts and avoid season 2 of our show altogether." This is Tawny Newsome, who plays Mariner. And I guess she's referencing swearing on Discovery and Picard. I don't remember there being swearing in Lower Decks last season. I didn't see any in this episode, but she said that. And so I just said to her, or you could make your show actual Star Trek versus Rick and Morty Starfleet edition, where the characters behave like actual adult Starfleet officers / professionals in a hierarchical, used it there on the Twitter, organization instead of 18-year-old denizens of a space frat / sorority. You could do that, which is what I was saying earlier. That's my biggest problem with the show. And she actually replied, she was like, nah. Nah. So she blew me off, but that's all right. Anyway, that was my interaction with her on the Twitter, where you can find me, by the way, at Hypersonic1701, interestingly enough. But yeah, so I'll be back next week with a review of the next episode. Until then, I take my leave and I say, as always, peace and long life.